I am R1 Cameron, and this is the Conduit. All right, everyone. It is May 31, 2021. It's 81 degrees in Bremerton, Washington. A hot one. A lot of you are out there celebrating, having a good time. Remembering folks are at work, doing what we do. But I needed to continue my conversation from yesterday. And I'm sure many of you probably haven't had a chance to see that, as it started pretty late and went into the morning. I think that podcast ended at about 4:30 this morning. So, kind of go in, do my research, and, through that, you've got a lot to share, and, just wanted to keep going. So, and try to get through it all. And so there's so much to unpack. And there's so many connections, and, there's so much history that has been hidden or just hasn't been shared. So we don't have it. We don't know it. And we need to. It's tremendously important. So I wanted to get into that a little bit more. Again, this is the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And so we're going to go ahead and get into that. So I see that I'll let a few people jump in here before I really get going here. But I'm going to share with you an article that was written today. And this article was written by Yun Lee. It was published this morning. And the title of it is Black Wall Street was Shattered 100 years ago. How the Tulsa Race Massacre was covered up and unearthed. So I wanted to go on a little bit more of a deeper dive today as we are reflecting on Memorial Day. So I think it's important. And then if time allows, we'll go ahead and make some further connections to what's happening today, maybe tie that to, what's happening politically in our schools with critical race theory and some other things that we have going on. I will say, if you want to call in and have a conversation, let me know in the chat and I will send you the link and you can join me in the conversation. As I said, we will have a intellectually honest conversation, but it won't be easy. It'll be hard to hear, right? It's hard for the people that went through it. It's hard for the people that hit it. And it's hard for the folks that, really don't want to address it because of what it entails, what it's going to require. Because the sorry is not sufficient. We must do better is not sufficient. So much more is required. And so therefore, we're going to need to do that. Well, let me just send a message here quickly. I am live. I've got a pretty busy schedule today. Pretty excited for one of my meetings that should take place later on today. I'm excited about that. And I got here it is. Let's see. Comments on Little Daddy podcast. Okay. All right. At least she's not on there. About my daughter was on the podcast. Want to make sure she's not listening to this one again. But let's go ahead and jump on in. Go ahead and get my phone ready. All right. And then let me go ahead and silence this thing. I tell you what, before we jump in there, I got this iPhone back in, what was that, December. I think it was December actually. And I swear I haven't gotten any better at using this thing than day one. A little bit of hyperbole. I know I've gotten a little bit better, but man, I am definitely an Android person. I appreciate, well, you know what? I can't even appreciate all that it can do just because I'm not using, you know, a fifth of what that phone can do. So it is quite the device for sure. One last thing I want to do here is just check my audios. I noticed my audio level was a little loud yesterday. And if you remember the podcast previous to that, we took it outdoors. And so let's just make sure that's sounding okay. All right. I think I'm sounding all right. All right. If it's sounding a little strange to you, go ahead and let me know. Send me a text or reach out in the chat. Let's go ahead and get into this. Okay. So this is Black Wall Street was shattered 100 years ago, how the Tulsa Race Massacre was covered up and unearthed. This article, I probably should show you, came from CNBC and again was published by Yun Lee. And I just copied and pasted it into a Google document so it would be easier to see without all the ads here on the side. Okay. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as education, yada, yada, yada. All right, here is a picture of the ruins of the Greenwood District after the massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma on June 1921, American National Red Cross photograph collection. A century ago this week, the wealthiest U.S. community was burned to the ground. At the turn of the century, the Greenwood District of Tulsa, Oklahoma became one of the first communities in the country thriving with Black entrepreneurial businesses. The prosperous town, founded by many descendants of slaves, earned a reputation as the Black Wall Street of America and became a harbor for African American and highly segregated city under Jim Crow laws. On May 31, 1921, a white mob turned Greenwood upside down in one of the worst racial massacres in U.S. history. In the matter of hours, 35 square blocks, that's massive, 35 square blocks of the vibrant Black community were turned into smoldering ashes. Countless Black people were killed. Estimates range from 55 to more than 300. And 1,000 homes and businesses were looted and set on fire. Yet for the longest time, the massacre received scant mentions in newspapers, textbooks, and civil and governmental conversations. It wasn't until 2000 that the slaughter was included in the Oklahoma public schools. So 80 years before it was even included in Oklahoma public schools. Black history, American history. Oklahoma public schools curriculum. It did not enter American history textbook books until recent years. And the 1921 Tulsa Race Riot Commission was formed to investigate in 1997 and officially released a report in 2001. So if you'd like to read that report, if you follow that article, that is where you can find that. The massacre was actively covered up in the white community in Tulsa for nearly half a century. That is 50 years, 50, said Scott Ellsworth, a professor of Afro American and African studies at the University of Michigan and author of the groundbreaking About the Tulsa Massacre. When I started my research in the 1970s, I discovered that official National Guard reports and other documents were all missing, Ellsworth said. Tulsa's two daily white newspapers, they went out of their way for decades not to mention the massacre. Researchers who would try to do the work on this as late as the early 1970s had their lives threatened and had their careers threatened. So, again, when we talk about systemic racism, the institutions of white supremacy, this wasn't just a few bad apples. This was hundreds of white people that destroyed, killed, looted, robbed. And it wasn't just the mob, as they would have you believe, right? This was the government, this was the newspapers. So all the institutions, this is the educational departments, all the institutions working together to make sure that this doesn't make the light of day. And anyone who would dare to try to research it or unearth it had their lives threatened or their careers threatened. See, I'm in a position now where I don't work for the college, I don't work for the Navy. So come on, threaten me. Do what you do. The body of an unidentified black victim of the Tulsa Race Massacre lies in the street as white man stands over him. Tulsa, Oklahoma, June 1, 1921. So again, we have slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, segregation. Black folks pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, had a thriving community and economy, and white people came in and destroyed it. The banks, the houses, right? They looted, they destroyed, they burned, they killed men, women, children. National Guard came in to help and assist. No one was charged. We'll get to that soon. So no one was ever held accountable. As I was saying in my broadcast the other day, if anyone makes any kind of anti Semitic comment or talks ill of the Holocaust or some other atrocities that have happened, the penalty is severe. But this country took an active role, not just the people, in covering up. For decades, and we're just now hearing about it. And so to say, oh, well, just get over it, that was a long time ago. Well, as you see, there are people that are testifying who were there still today because they're still alive. So this wasn't 400 years ago. 200 years ago. This is recent. And in the 70s, as people tried to begin to unearth what happened, they discovered the coordinated effort to hide the evidence of what happened. Kind of sound familiar? And for today, in the week following the massacre, Tulsa chief of police ordered his officers to go to all the photography studios in Tulsa and confiscate all pictures taken of the carnage, Ellsworth said. So we have police today that have body cams that they're supposed to have on with the audio on. And as I shared in the story yesterday, we had the black boy that was strip searched in the middle of the street, 16 years old, and then taken to his home to go and search that. And the officer turned his audio off and then later turned it on and said, "Oh, I forgot." We've seen countless stories of officers not turning on their body cam footage or not being on. But then we see the powers that be saying, "Hey, you know what? We can't release this footage because it may taint a potential jury pool." But they use that evidence when it fits their narrative. If they believe it's clean cut, then it's released immediately and shown. Or sometimes what they'll do is they'll release just a little bit. Like the brother that got shot in the back of the head, who was terrified. And we saw the video of how they rode up like they were taking out Osama bin Laden. So when we talk about why things like critical race theory might be important, why people need to be held accountable, why the United States needs to be held accountable, why reparations are necessary, and why and how we can't move on. As I said before, right? The saying is, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. Well, we don't know the history, do we? Because it's just now starting to be uncovered. And the things that we have been saying for years, even back before Rodney King, or the videotape footage changed America. We went another 20, 30 years before cell phone footage started coming forward. And now body cam footage, right? These are things that we have been saying since before Rodney King. We in this country, we will believe every other victim except for the black victim, especially if it's a black man. But we'll get to that. I'm going to reread this paragraph. In the week following the massacre, Tulsa's chief of police ordered his officers to go to all the photography studios in Tulsa and confiscate all the pictures taken of the carnage, Ellsworth said. These photos, which were later discovered and became the materials the Oklahoma Commission used to study the massacre, eventually landed in the lap of Michelle Place at the Tulsa Historic Society and Museum of 2001. I would encourage you that if you find yourself in Oklahoma and anywhere near Tulsa, maybe check out the museum and look at the American history. It took me about 4 days to get through this box because the photographs were so horrific. I had never seen those kinds of pictures before, Place said. I didn't know anything about the riot, massacre, before I came to work here. I never heard of it. Since I've been here, I've been at my desk to guard them to the very best of my ability. Patients recovering from injuries sustained in the Tulsa massacre. The Tulsa Museum was founded in the late 1990s, but visitors couldn't find a trace of the race massacre until 2012, when Place became the executive director. So, again, how are we supposed to move past when we haven't even addressed it? When so many of us are dealing with these traumas that have never been answered. And as I shared in my podcast yesterday, I think I went over at least 7 or 8 different massacres in detail, but talked about scores of different massacres. And I know it's a long podcast, it's 4 hours long. But put it on while you're cleaning, put it on while you're driving to work. It's probably stuff you never knew about. But you don't tell people to get over the Holocaust. But it's so easy to tell us that. The Tulsa Museum was founded in the late 1990s, but visitors couldn't find a trace of the race massacre until 2012 when Place became the executive director, determined to tell all of Tulsa's stories. A digital collection of the photographs was eventually made available for viewing online. There's still a significant number of people in our community who don't want to look at it and who don't want to talk about it, Place said. And we can see nationwide folks that are against critical race theory being taught in the schools. Now, what's interesting is I was listening to a conversation yesterday. Shout out to Tariq Nasheed. And what he was saying was, and I'm going to try to summarize it. But critical race theory is like if you break it down, right, you're being critical. So it's the analysis of race. Well, what about race, right? Well, it's supposed to be about history. That's why it's taught in schools, right? And so what he was saying was when you call it theory, then you get to interject all types of other things. You know, what race are we talking about? Are we talking about black folks? Are we talking about other people? Are we going to water it down and say BIPOC, where we again become a footnote in our own history? And just as both sides use us to further their agenda, no matter what it is they're talking about, whoever came up with the horrific acronym of BIPOC, what's so apropos about it is it's BIPOC, right? Black, indigenous, and people of color. And in most of the news reports, they will say, oh, black and brown people were negatively affected. Black people are this, that, and that. Housing, homelessness, education, whatever, incarceration, police brutality, justice, injustices. And then they'll go on to talk about other intersectionalities, or other demographics. And then services and things are provided to those groups. That was the same thing that was happening when COVID was such a big thing. Remember? Oh, black people were 4 to 5 times more likely to die from COVID. And they used that as a tactic, right? That was their talking point. And then when the vaccine first came out, if you can remember back, you know, some of the richest zip codes were getting the vaccine. People were lying, dressing up, doing all kinds of different things. You looked up and everybody else seemed to be getting the vaccine, but the black population was having a problem that who wanted it to gain access to it. So I absolutely abhor the term BIPOC and all of these neo terminology that again goes to symbolically acknowledge the issue and the ongoing, I don't even have a word for it, ongoing crimes, travesties, injustices that happen to the black community. But then it is shifted. And so that's what you're seeing now, right? You've got parents and teachers across the country that are against critical race theory. They don't want their kids to be exposed to history, what America has done and has not atoned for, what their family members, what their friends have done. Again, this isn't slavery of 400 or 500 years ago. Again, when I talked about slavery, and when people say, "Well, I didn't own any slaves," or I'm an immigrant. I came over here. My family came over here. I'm first or second generation immigration. I wasn't even around during slave times. But we reflected in the last podcast on all of the companies and organizations that existed to keep slavery in its place. I gave you the example of the man or the woman that's has their Confederate flag flying. Oftentimes, you may find swastika, some other things that go along with that. Who made the flag? Or the cutting board, Confederate cutting board, or the calendar, or all the other items that go along with it. So, very well may be that those people didn't own slaves, right? But they helped to perpetuate it, helped to keep it in place. They thrived off of it. And immigrants that come to this country, European or not, are coming because America is better, has opportunity. But it's that way off the blood and the bodies of the men, women, and children of Black America. So even if you came here today, the America that you are trying to come to is the America that it is because of us. It is Memorial Day. These things are now starting to come out. The silence is layered. Not only did Tulsa city officials cover up the bloodbath, but they also deliberately shifted the narrative of the massacre by calling it a riot. Sound familiar? You hear this on Fox News all the time. We're demonized, called rioters, and blaming the Black community for what went down, according to Alicia Adewale, an archaeologist at the University of Tulsa. Well, it's our fault that white folks had to come in and kill men, women, and children, rob, steal, loot, take souvenirs. I shared with you yesterday how in some of the massacres they were cutting off fingers and cutting off ears and then whipping and torturing survivors to make them take the blame for it after. The massacre also wasn't discussed publicly in the African American community either for a long term. First, out of fear. If it happened once, it can happen again. So when people, and I hear this shit all the time. Well, you guys just need to pull yourself up from your bootstraps. You just need to try harder. You weren't so lazy. Black on black crime, right? All the dog whistles, and it's really overt. It's not covert, right? America just plays this game as if they, who, me? Throw the rock and hide their hands behind their back. But this wasn't just Black Wall Street. As I said, I shared more than a half a dozen cities that were destroyed by white Americans. And so, yeah, I'm going to build it back up for you to come in and kill the men, women, and children again. I say the tall blade of grass gets cut. And just with many Holocaust survivors, right? They didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want their kids and their grandkids to know. And it could happen again. It continued to happen. So we just got to take it. You are seeing the perpetrators walking freely on the streets, Ottawale said. You are in the Jim Crow South, and there are racial terrors happening across the country at this time. They are protecting themselves for a reason. Prisoners of war that you never participated in, just a POW. Moreover, this became such a traumatic event for survivors, and much like Holocaust survivors and World War II veterans, many of them didn't want to burden their children and grandchildren with these horrible memories. Ellsworth said he knows of descendants of the massacre survivors who didn't find out until they were in their 40s and 50s. I didn't even want my 9-year-old to watch this particular podcast. We need to have a conversation first. But does she need to be 40 or 50 before she hears about it? Before she has an understanding? So again, we don't know our own history. And growing up without that history makes us grow up in this false sense of security. Yeah, they felt like they were probably a lot safer than what they really were. But they weren't given a choice to rebel against the machine. And my assumption would be if the survivors didn't want the descendants to know until their late 40s and 50s. And when they're in their 40s and 50s, their kids are, teenagers or young adults, right? So now you're talking about 2 generations. History lost. You have no idea what your grandmother, what your father, your mother, what your great grandmother, your great grandfather went through. And again, we're talking about the survivors, so they're still alive. But you really didn't know you didn't hear the story on why your uncle or your aunt died. Or, I'm sorry, was murdered. Why your parents had a few pictures of you thriving, being a business owner, and now living in a tent city. Yes, they had tent cities back then. Showed you some pictures yesterday. Well, mom, dad, how do we go from this house that I see pictures of and us owning the store to now we're in a tent or we're living in this situation? Doesn't really make any sense. The silence is layered just as the trauma is layered, Ottawelli said. The historical trauma is real and the trauma lingers, especially because there's no justice. There's no accountability and no reparation or monetary compensation. You know, it's having a conversation with some folks that love the older movies, Going with the Wind, things like that, Casablanca, black and white movies, right? And they depict this romantic era. And it's like, uh, that wasn't our experience. Can it happen again? We've heard the stories on racist active duty and veteran military personnel getting out and training militias. Same with police. I remember when I was teaching at Olympic College and the election was Trump and Clinton. And I was sure Trump was going to win. And everyone was saying, no, there's no way that Donald Trump can win. And I was like, you don't see the country. You don't experience the country the way that I experienced the country. And what I was told by a director, who I consider, good acquaintance, was like, man, I hope that's not the case. Because I got to tell you, man, you guys don't stand a chance. No offense. But my family and my friends have so many guns and weapons stockpiled. It'll be a massacre. It wouldn't even be a fight. Sound familiar? That was 2016. This was before Trump came into office. That's why it always pisses me off when I hear Democrats or Liz Cheney now, right? Remember, Liz Cheney used to be bad with her husband. Now she's against Trump, so now she's good, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yeah, nah, I don't think so. But when the Democrats blame everything on Trump, and Democrats are so short sighted because as they try to demonize Trump and try to uh, charge him with a crime, and hopefully, if they can just take Trump out of the picture, everything will be just right. The Republican Party will be reeling. They won't have new leadership that steps up, and they'll be more moderate. But again, this is how the country was before Trump, during the Obama years. I played a clip from you where Obama was saying he couldn't do anything, even as president for 8 years, as popular as he was. Couldn't say anything. He was powerless. Could you imagine? But we were also told that we were post racial because we had a black president, right? We have equality. So don't put this on Trump. It's just like saying, the alcohol made me do it. It's what I hear when I hear that, you know. Oh, it was alcohol that made me do it. Okay. Oh, it's all Trump. We can just charge Trump, get him out of the picture, then everything will be okay. The Republican Party will go back to being the party of Reagan or Bush. All parties that existed that were keeping these things hidden away. But we don't want to talk about it. We need to fight against it, right? This just goes to divide us. This is divisive. This doesn't help anything. We need to move past it. We need to work together. Yes, I know that we murdered you, we stole you, we raped you, we hung you, we whipped you, we've destroyed you in every way possible. We've incarcerated you, we've lied on you, we've lied to you, and we've lied about you. But we just need to go ahead and get past it now, right? I mean, you've got LeBron and Jay-Z. You're good. And if y'all just try hard enough, y'all can beat LeBron or even Obama. Let me talk about the meritorious manumissions, as I talked about in another podcast, where I can see some folks already taking 2 and 3 steps to their left and to the back, trying to get out of the room that I'm in. Because, well, brother, you gonna mess it up for us. We trying to make progress, and folks ain't gonna want to work with us if you are going to call it out, if you're going to talk about it, because it makes them feel uncomfortable. When I was a consultant for the Navy, I left in January of this year, 2021. And right before then President Trump stopped the diversity and equity and inclusion um, programming that we had going on, right? We had convened a panel and we were talking about ways to start these discussions. And the pushback was these discussions were making white people feel bad. And they felt like they were being demonized for something that they didn't do, slavery, or something that they didn't do, the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre. And they're being called racist or prejudiced. And we're having these conversations. And one of the things that I shared was there's more than 50 employees here. And I'm the only black male. How's that possible out of 50? But they tout this diversity in hiring and recruitment. And they say, well, we look for the very best. How do you become the very best when you have to overcome these images? Hmm. So you become the very best in spite of. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to be made to feel guilty. We just need to move on. And I already talked about how everyone has benefited off of the bodies and the blood of Black people, foundational Black Americans. This is Memorial Day. You're watching the Conduit podcast with Marwan. So, what triggered the massacre? On May 31, 1921, Dick Rowland, a 19-year-old black shoe shiner, tripped and fell in the elevator, and his hand accidentally caught the shoulder of Sarah Page, a white 17-year-old operator. Page screamed, and Rowland was seen running away. White woman, black boy in the elevator, white girl screams. Oh boy. Police were summoned, but Page refused to press charges because nothing happened. However, by that afternoon, there were already talks of lynching. So she didn't want to press charges, but because she screamed, he must be hung. There were already talks of lynching rolling on the streets of white Tulsa. The tension then escalated after the white newspaper, right? The institution of white supremacy, the demonization of black males. The escalation after the white newspaper Tulsa Tribune ran a front page story entitled "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in Elevator," which accused Rowland of stalking, assault, and rape. How many stories from Emmett Till to before to contemporary stories do we hear where black men are lied on? Sometimes even invisible men are even made up to be lynched, either literally or metaphorically. And again, it's interesting because the advocation is to believe all victims, unless it's a black man. In the Tribune, there was also a now lost editorial entitled "To Lynch Tonight." According to Ellsworth, when the Works Progress Administration went to microfilm the old issue of the Tribune in the 1930s, the op-ed had already been torn out of the newspaper. Because you got to hide it, right? Again, some of these folks are still alive. The op-ed had already been torn out of the newspaper, Ellsworth said. Many believe the newspaper coverage undoubtedly played a part of sparking the massacre. So one thing that I want to talk about before I go forward is this. Some disillusioned black people. You'll see something happen to them, and they'll say things like, "I didn't know there was still so much, hatred and racism in the country." Or, well, that was their grandfathers or their great grandfathers. They rarely will say great grandmothers or great or mothers. But for it to be hid for 50 years, right? The people who were adults then had to retire. So the next generation had to continue to hide it. And the generation after that, and the generation after that, and the generation after that. So it's not dying out. The newer, younger generations are participating in the institution of white supremacy and racism in this country. This is Memorial Day. Before we get into the aftermath, I wanted to show this short little synopsis from a gentleman where I found out about this article that was that I just read, right? So as I said, fair use. We key him up here. And I think it's important to listen to what other people have to say, the ones that will actually tell you the truth, the ones whose lives don't hang in the balance, the ones who are not relying upon that job or grant or business opportunity. Or opportunity for their kids. The ones that are not disillusioned. That have watched generation after generation just continue to pray and be steadfast. And watch things continue to be and go as they are. Let's go ahead and listen to, shout out to the Green Gorilla. You can subscribe to his channel, listen to his content.
Well, on May 31st, 1921, 100 years ago from today, a 19-year-old by the name of Dick Rowland, a shoe shiner, a black boy, an ADOS, an African American, a colored boy, whatever you want to call it, 19 years of age, tripped and fell down in an elevator, and his hand accidentally touched the shoulder of Sarah Page, a 17-year-old white girl who was operating the elevator. She screamed, Rowland ran, and this is what sparked the whole debacle, the whole massacre. This is why this event is directly connected to Black misandric aggression. Because if that would have been a black woman who tripped and fell and touched that white woman's shoulder, do you think this would have popped off like that? I doubt it.
We'll unpack that later. See, this requires a lot of intellectual fortitude to be able to separate and to investigate and think about things in a different way than what you've been taught at liberal colleges and universities. Hang in there.
This is why it's important for people to understand that racism gets played out through the filter of gender. But it's not what you would think today, because you have all of these theories and ideologies which talk about who is the most oppressed identity political group and so on and so forth, but they don't look at the historical facts. And when they do look at the historical facts, those groups who pretend that they're most oppressed because they're members of multiple groups of oppressed people, when you look at the historical record, you don't find them dying in the same numbers as black men. You just don't see it. You don't see the same kind of racial animus and energy as is directed towards black men. You don't see it.
The reason why this is important is I shared in some previous podcasts, right? You have so many different groups that advocate for themselves. So you have the LGBT community, you have the indigenous community, American, Asian, Pacific Islander community, Latino community, Latinx. You even have African American women. And we've talked about what you see, right? If you Google, grants or business grants, you'll find out, lots of opportunities for Black women. You don't see a lot of things for Black men. I talked about the actual stats, right? About how our health, prostate cancer kills a lot of Black men. Now, what's odd is the NFL, every year, what do? They advocate for cancer and they're wearing pink, right? Because it's for breast cancer. There are more homeless men than there are women and children. And the percentages are tremendously high for African American males who are homeless. Even our literacy levels coming out of high school or at the 4th and 5th grade level are in the double digits, high double digits. Unacceptable. But all of these programs are centered around Black Girl Magic and female empowerment. And while that is not bad, what does the heterosexual Black male have? Who is advocating for him as you try to dismantle the patriarchy of the Black man? Wasn't in an oppressive patriarchy with the Black woman growing up through slavery and post-slavery. And that's where the anti-Black misandry comes from. Misandry means the hatred of men. Anti-Black misandry, the hatred of Black men. We discussed this on a podcast maybe a month and a half ago. So someone has to advocate for the heterosexual Black male, and that's not popular to do because predominantly 3-1, we are killed by police, and many times we're unarmed. And so while all these other groups have come out and marched for us, Black Lives Matter and others, even those organizations have been usurped. And now there's quite the distinction between BLM and BLM. So yes, all Black lives do matter as a statement of fact. But the organization of Black Lives Matter, if you looked at the websites when they first started really gaining their momentum, was to disintegrate the patriarchy. The Black male patriarchy. So now our dead bodies are being used to further everyone else's agendas. See, we're going deep here. So you've got to, again, suspend what you've learned, suspend what you've heard, suspend what you think you believe. Open your mind. Because this was hidden for decades. And you're just now finding out about it. And if you watched the podcast yesterday, this was one of dozens. So what do you actually know? So when you formulate your theories are based on your research, right? Trying different things, establishing new evidence. But all of your theories are based on what you thought you know or knew and what you've been taught. But you didn't know about any of this stuff. So if we want to have a conversation, we can switch that with anything. If you are a woman and if you've ever been sexually assaulted or raped, which is heinous and horrible, switch that up. If you're watching me, maybe you're home right now. You're sitting in your house, you're cooking dinner. If you're on the East Coast, probably done with dinner. You're working out. So imagine somebody 30 blocks away trips and falls and grabs someone and they scream. And within a matter of days, a bunch of murderous people come to your neighborhood and kill you, your wife, your husband, your kids. They steal everything that you've worked for. They set your living body on fire. They hang you. They cut your ears off. They cut your fingers off. They take mementos. If you survive, they torture you and beat you and make you take the blame for it. No one is held accountable for it. The insurance doesn't cover any of the losses, property losses, that is. You're living in a tent city. You're going into in the back of a pickup truck. You're trying to get the hell out of Dodge. And that's if you had your faculties and could walk away. Saw the image of folks that were in the hospitals. You dare not speak about it. There's nowhere for you to go. There's no safe exodus for us. We have, hundreds of thousands of immigrants trying to immigrate from a place that is worse. Hundreds of miles they're crossing. Where the hell do we go? Jump back in.
So Sarah Page screamed, Dick Rowland ran, and the police were summoned, and Page, after having screamed, don't know if it was a knee-jerk reaction, but whatever the case may be, the cultural context in which this occurred is the Jim Crow South, 1921, 100 years ago. Now, we know for a fact that this is how many years removed from slavery itself, the emancipation. So emancipation happened in 1865, correct?
Yes.
So add another 60 years to that. We're 60 years removed away from slavery.
There's 2 generations.
And we know who were the terrorists during that time frame. But then all of a sudden, for some reason, it becomes etched into the popular conscious of white America that black men are a threat. And you know what the real sad thing is? Black men probably should be a fucking threat.
I excuse the F-bomb there. As many of you know, I don't curse very often. I just think there's too many words in the English dictionary for me to use such language, but I do use it. I do curse. I also do wear jeans. But I think as a point of emphasis, it can be effectively used.
Because they know what they've done. They know what they did. That's why they tried to hide the shit and slip it up under the rug. They know what they've been doing. We probably should be a fucking threat. But that's too much radical Negro talk, ain't it? That's too much radical Negro talk. Oh no, we shouldn't say nothing about them white folk. We just, it's us. We is our own worst enemy. We just some bad people. And if we wasn't so lazy and shiftless and spineless, we'd have something. And I
See why that's so important is this. And if you've been listening to me, and I guess this is more for people that may be tuning in for the first time, right? The institution of white supremacy isn't that, oh, you know what? White people are bad, and that's what it is, right? The institution is now this machine, and it doesn't matter who's in that machine. There's a vested interest to keep that machine going. So everyone in the BIPOC community belongs in part of that machine. And so what he's saying there is what we get from a lot of black folks. You can look at our politicians, the go along to get along folks. America is not racist. Vice President Kamala Harris. You ain't black if you don't vote Democrat. President Joe Biden. It's racist. But when he panders to the black church, to the black community, and says, I'm not going to promise you anything, you should just be glad that I'm even saying it and acknowledging it. Like that should be good enough. Or when Kamala Harris says, I'm not going to do anything for just black people, I'll do something for all people. But these things have been hidden for decades. And then we are scapegoated as it was our own fault. We did it to ourselves. We brought it on ourselves. We should have done better. I mean, we freed you. I mean, why are you still in this situation? And so again, for the intellectually dishonest, slavery would still be going on if it wasn't for good white folks that helped to abolish, that participated in freeing slaves. When I interviewed Roosevelt Smith, he talked about with Jackie Gleason on the trains, right? And how he treated black folks on the trains. Right? There's been good white people throughout history in America. So again, intellectually honest, if you're the good one, you're the good one. But hit dogs do holler. And people that are intellectually dishonest take offense to any kind of conversation there, right? But in the same breath will demonize us and say, well, black on black crime in Chicago and this and that and yada, yada, yada. But you just can't see it in yourself. So the institution of white supremacy, the institution of racism, through education, through the justice system, through our economics, through housing, through employment, it permeates everything. And it's not just white people that are keeping us in that space. Matter of fact, that might be a good segue to share this. Just to prove or bolster my assertion. Again, this is the African Diaspora channel, has 1.2 million subscribers. This is news that you won't get anywhere else.
Stop that from happening.
Let's go ahead and wait for this commercial to finish here. Can't get around the commercials. Just got to let it do its thing. So let it get through its commercial because I'm not paying for the full YouTube. What is that, like $30, $40 a month? It's kind of crazy. All right, let's try this again. And it wanted to give me another commercial. They love the commercials. I always wonder why I get the commercials I get. You know, do you ever wonder that? Like, that seems kind of weird. Like, why are you marketing that to me? I think I get Chuck Schumer a lot. It's like, I'm not a fan of Chuck Schumer, so I don't know why you're giving me Chuck Schumer, but okay. you know,
Well, some information came out about who was funding the Proud Boys. And this information that, was released off of a hack became very interesting, especially when we've been hearing all of, the Stop Asian Hate and, all black people are literally being, anointed as people just attacking Asians, which we know that's a bold-faced lie. Is a lie from the pit of hell. And we know when the white supremacists speak, they're lying. We know this because black folks say, who's attacking Asians like that? And we know it's just happening in New York and in San Francisco area, especially New York. It's literally they're not brothers and sisters from America. They're immigrants. They're wearing red, pink hoodies. They're doing it right in front of cameras. It's like 4K. Like, oh, let me go do this. They're wearing hats. They're doing, it's like, say, it's quite obvious that these people, and we know from history that people have been paid to do things like this. We know this. We know. So, with this information that came out.
What I'll say to that is, we have been paid to sell each other out for almost nothing. But we will do that. And that is where the term meritorious manumissions comes from. It actually was a thing that if you were to save the life of a slave owner or invent something or snitch on a slave rebellion, you would get meritorious manumissions and you could win your freedom, right? And so from the dawn from slavery on, right, black folks have sold out their own community and have been bought off. And so that's what I'll say to that. I think I needed to add to that piece there.
They talked about how the Proud Boys had a lot of funding from Chinese people coming from, they say in this country. And they said about 80% of the funds raised from the members of the Proud Boys who were injured during the violent Washington, D.C. clashes in December came from them. So they said that in total, they said gifts from the Chinese diaspora, they said, which began pouring in through Give, Send, Go, fundraising website on December 17th, amounted to $86,000 of the $106,107 in donations raised to cover medical costs of members of the white supremacist street gang. Okay? So they say on December 13th, after they say protesters took over the streets of Washington as they refused to accept the results, they say, of the presidential election at the time, they say 4 people were stabbed near Harry's Bar. They say a popular hangout for the white supremacist group Proud Boys as they clashed with Antifa counter protesters. So on December 17th, they say a donor named Li Zhang, they said, gave $100 to the Proud Boys before Hao Zhu gave $20, they say, which was followed by Ying Pei's $25 donation. They say messages left by those who donated, they say, also provided insight about why members of the Chinese diaspora, they say, would offer financial support to the all-male organization formed in 2016. One of them said, you have to understand how we feel. We came from communist China, and we managed to come here and appreciate it here so much. They'll say about Rebecca Kwan, they gave $500 to the Proud Boys on Christmas Day. They said the Proud Boys are for Trump, and they're fighting Antifa. They're saying, can you see anything good that Antifa did except destroy department stores and small businesses? Another one said that the Proud Boys are protecting the innocent people. Donald Wayne of Queens, New York said this. They say a lot of people in my community support them, and he gave them $50. Another one says, thank you for your courage to fight for our freedom. Old Lou, it said, who wrote after donating $30. Now, this is the thing here. Let me look at another one here. Thank you, Proud Boys. You are my heroes, wrote Nancy Chang, who sent $300 the day before the riots. Okay? So, is it individuals that's funding the Proud Boys? Or is it the Chinese Communist Party funding the Proud Boys to keep dissension and keep, the country, always fighting each other at rest? They know they're white supremacist groups. Because anyone knows that America will fall from within, not just really an all-out military attack. We all know racism and white supremacy is the Achilles heel of America. But as you've seen, whether they are individuals or a part of the Chinese Communist Party, we don't actually know fully. But what we do know is this. When, a lot of times the conversation comes out about immigrants, usually it's talked about people south of the border coming in, or the conversation has been when someone who comes from a different, black country starts siding with the white supremacists, then the conversation comes out about immigrants, okay? My thing is, what I don't understand is how can a Chinese side with a white supremacist when you understand their history? And we talked about that on this channel. But some of them feel, well, you know what? I want to be with the white supremacists. That's fine, okay? Well, black folks was talking about this. We knew how you felt about black people. We saw how many times you were attacking black women in these nail shops and beauty supply stores. And nobody came out with a bill about protecting black people. Notice that no feminist groups came out talking about is an attack on women when all these black women are constantly attacked. When Breonna Taylor was killed, there was no mention about an attack on women. When Sandra Bland was killed, no attack on women. When Corinne Gaines was killed, nothing about an attack on women. I want black women to notice that when you trying to join with your Mzungu friends, talking about you are a feminist. They are opportunists that use you. That's what they are. But when something happened to you, they do not care. But as you can see, there's financially, listen, 80% of the money that came to the Proud Boys wasn't even by their own, it was by Chinese in this country.
I'll stop it there. Again, that is the African Diaspora channel. If you want to watch more videos there, you can. So I encourage you to do that. But he shares a lot of news that isn't in the mainstream media. And I'm sure that many of you watching have never even seen any of that footage and didn't know that, the GoFundMe or whatever was hacked. And so it revealed who the donors were and it had their comments, right? So if you are thinking about the mainstream media, well, it's just the bad apple white people that are racist, the Proud Boys, the Boogaloo Boys, and whatever that are doing this. And it's like, no, it's not just them. It's not just them. So we got to be careful. We've got to be careful. We got to know what the truth is. And should you be informed? Absolutely. Should you do your own research? Absolutely. I encourage you to do your own research after you've listened to this podcast, to confirm or to dig deeper, to go and look at the articles. And we're in such a microwave society now that we want everything instantaneously, right? We don't even wait for the evening news. We go to YouTube and we're getting our news there, or Instagram or Twitter. And so by the time you're waiting for the 6 o'clock news, that's so old, it's not even funny. And we consume it so quickly now. But we don't always know where the source is, or we only get one side of it. And black men in particular have been demonized in the mainstream media from the beginning, as you saw in the newspaper articles back in Tulsa. And then to hide it, they actually ripped the articles out. and threaten people's lives and their careers if they tried to dig up the truth. And only now are you starting to hear about it. It's Memorial Day. It is May 31, 2021. We're talking about Tulsa and the massacre that took place 100 years ago today. Some people say that it happened in June. Other documents have it as May 31. But either way, it is the 100-year anniversary. A 108-year-old woman, survivor, went to Congress and testified. They gave her a tokenized standing ovation after and thanked her for her story. And she's hoping for justice, whatever kind of justice you can give a 108-year-old who watched all that take place as a child. So if it was 100 years ago, that means she was 8. My daughter is 9. I couldn't imagine my daughter watching me be murdered and her mother be murdered, killed, burned, hung, the house ransacked, our neighbors killed, burned, hung, destroyed. And growing up and living in fear that it could happen again. And then to watch everyone around you hide it. You're hiding it out of fear. You're not talking about it. But everyone else around is taking advantage and growing and excelling, growing their wealth, creating generational wealth, being able to give their children their homes, their investments, their insurance. And then being told, well, you just need to work harder. If you weren't so lazy, you'd be in a better place. And how it wasn't just Tulsa, but it was dozens of cities. How I showed you the map yesterday of scores of 20. So scores of massacres. There was a video I was going to play yesterday, and it was talked about the 13 worst massacres in U.S. history. And it was all the massacres that had taken place, like the nightclub, the Vegas massacre, Columbine, and some of the other ones, right? Sandy Hook. And I think Vegas might have been one of the largest ones, 50 dead, 50 murdered, something along those lines. And they're reporting it as the worst. We didn't even exist. Like we didn't even exist. We don't even count that happened in 1921, in 1919. We don't count the Watts race. Well, I was going to say riot, massacre. Or Chicago, everywhere else. And how people are charged, how the police and the National Guard and the newspapers and the judicial system and the educational system all upheld, didn't hold anyone accountable, and then hid it. And it's a wonder that Black people are so forgiving. In the fear of, if we were given power, would we do to you what you've done to us? And it's quite clear that we wouldn't, because we are so forgiving, right? Botham John is murdered sitting in his chair having a bowl of cereal, and the judge comes down out of the stands and hugs the officer that killed him. You know, the odd thing is that, you know, our law enforcement, our judicial folks, our military, they should be held to a higher accountability, right? You took this oath to protect and serve. Doctors take this oath to do no harm. But they're caught in lies and deceit and cover-ups. And when that happens, I think they should be charged to the fullest extent of the law because they have betrayed the public's trust. You have put a special level of trust into these people. And I think if you did that, what would happen is the bad people would be gone because there would be no place for them to thrive. There would be no thin blue line. There would be no benign neglect. Or if I do say something, you're going to attack me and destroy my career, so I dare not say anything. And then good police can protect and serve. Our armed forces can serve and protect our country, not leave and train racist militias to overthrow the government. But it's hard to do that if you can't reconcile that it's your brother, sister, mother, father. It's Memorial Day. We know that in 1919, many of our Black veterans that survived returned from World War I and suffered these massacres, which I shared in the podcast yesterday. Those were our veterans. Those were our heroes. The folks that fought for our country, even in the face of all the injustice and everything they had gone through. Remember, slavery had ended 60 years prior, or they were freed. So they're talking about, for some of them, their parents and definitely their grandparents. So they were very close to it. They were still serving their country. We definitely honor the fallen. As I said yesterday, growing up in the foster care system, being adopted, going back into the foster care system, I have quite the extended family. Those whose last name is Cameron and who is not. And there are lots of veterans that have served. And for all of the good veterans, thank you for your service. No, it's not Veterans Day, it's Memorial Day. We're remembering those that are gone. But I think it's important to state, because we're not speaking in absolutes. Maybe speaking generally speaking, but not absolutes. Again, be intellectually honest. Have a deeper conversation. So I told you, I brought up my Uncle Bob yesterday. Uncle Bob came back from the war and had an altercation with police. They beat him, and like I was saying yesterday, I didn't have a good word for it, but they basically beat him until he was retarded. And so he lived, I think, into his late 60s or 70s, but my grandfather had to take care of him. And Uncle Bob used to call himself the governor. Now my dad isn't here with us anymore, so I can't. My brother Jared might be able to do it. Oh, I'm the governor, Uncle Bob, governor. He'd say something along those lines. We couldn't really understand what he was saying. Tall, thin, dark, black man would roll his own cigarettes up in this blue can called Bugles. And I remember being a little kid, probably 6, 7 years old, and I would sit on the porch with him, and we'd have this roll of bologna with the red ribbon around it. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember that, or for those of you that are. And he had these big, long, thick fingernails, and he would roll his cigarettes up and we would sit on the porch, and he would give me pieces of bologna like a little dog. And I would just sit next to Uncle Bob, and he would talk to me. I couldn't understand what he was saying, and I would just smile and laugh, but he had that delicious bologna, so I would just sit out there with him. And so those were fond memories of Uncle Bob. A simpler time. A simpler time. So again, salute to all the veterans. Yeah, it's a good memory. It's a good memory. It's good to be able to have good memories. So think about those that are no longer here with us, that we've lost, that have served. And again, I am referring to the good ones. I have more to show you, but I think for now, I'll leave it here. And the reason is because I want to bring it into contemporary. And I can go. Last night I got home. I was at the park at a barbecue. And which was nice. Appreciated that. And it gave me a chance to kind of break up what I had going on, because I'm constantly working and researching and doing things. And so when I got back, I got the last of my research together. I got the call right in the middle of me. I was just getting ready to go live, like within the hour. So I come back and I'm like, okay, this might be like 90 minutes. Well, I went like 4.5 hours. My podcast didn't end until almost 5 a.m. this morning. So, I'm already at an hour and a half now. So I'm like, all right, you know what? Just go ahead and stop now. Come back in. You already got the content. You can tie it all in. Don't worry about it. But it's kind of a running joke that I can just go on and on and on. So I will try to be mindful of that. But I do enjoy talking to you. I enjoy providing you with information that you may not have. I do enjoy sparking your thought. If you want to comment, please send me a comment. If you're worried about how it may be perceived, I do understand that too. You can go ahead and DM me. If you want to come on the podcast, go ahead and contact me. If there's something that you want to talk about, even if it's not these topics, I'd be glad to have you on. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay cool. It's 81 degrees still currently in Bremerton. It's 6:46 p.m. May 31. I'm R1 Cameron, and this is The Conduit.